Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see you today. Yep, I got a little bit of a cold, so I apologize about that. But do you ever find yourself complaining? Evidently, I struck a nerve. I find myself complaining a lot, probably way more than I need to. For example, I drive north on 344 to get home. And I have said for years that it's starting to feel like a road that is paved by Lightning McQueen. And then about maybe 6 weeks ago, maybe kind of in that time frame, I was driving home and I saw this sign that said that construction was getting ready to start and expect delays. And while I was appreciative, very appreciative of the new paved road, it should have said, plan your day around delays. Anybody ever get caught up in that stuff on 344? It was a disaster. Let's talk a little bit about Walmart for a moment. Okay, and if you work for Walmart, I apologize, but they went from self-checkout and they brought all the new checkout lines into play, and that switchover, not better. No, not better. And so I'm like, this could have been planned out better. Now, it probably, cumulative over a couple of weeks, took about 20 minutes extra out of my life. But it was easy to complain about. And don't get me started about the paper bags. Okay? Because I have like 57 reusable bags in each of my vehicles that I remember that I have when I get up to the checkout line and go, great. And so, I've got a forest in my garage of Walmart bags. What about politics? We're just not even going to go there this morning. So the question is, though, do you ever complain about God? So it's kind of a hard subject here. And a lot of times we won't directly complain about God, but we will complain about our circumstances in which God has brought into our life. And even to the sense of we complain about our job, and we complain about our home, and we complain about our kids and our marriage, and you think, if I had a better job, or if I had a better home, or if I had a better spouse. But let me ask this question. What does complaining say about you? I mean, it actually tells us in the book of Philippians, do everything without grumbling or complaining. And I remember a time I was a youth pastor in Abilene, Texas, and the church had gone through a lot of complaining. And the pastor of the church, the lead pastor, got up one Sunday morning. They were studying through Philippians, and he preached through the passage, do everything without grumbling and complaining. And throughout the week, people were still grumbling and complaining about stuff in the church. So he got up the next Sunday, and he preached the same passage over again, re-preached the same sermon. And a little old lady named Wanda, he described her as she's got venom and she's got fangs. Wanda came up just really upset. And she was like, don't you know that you preached this passage 2 weeks in a row? And he goes, I'll stop preaching it when y'all get it. Which, by the way, he only lasted about another month in that church. So over the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about God's miraculous provision, protecting his people through the plagues, protecting his people and providing for them during the Passover. And Jim talked last week about God's miraculous provision as he parted the Red Sea and protected his people from Pharaoh and his army. And his bottom line was so good, I'm going to go ahead and repeat that. Our current circumstances don't limit the power of God. But sometimes we get enveloped into our circumstances, where circumstances are all that we can see. And we fail to look to Jesus And when we fail to look to Jesus, it is so easy to complain. And so while God has provided miraculously, and he has shown himself to act time and time and time again, their circumstances got the best of them. After crossing the Red Sea, they ended up going out into the Sinai wilderness, and they found no water for 3 days, which I'm thinking that's kind of getting at disaster point. And what we find is they came to a place called Marah, and as they were there, they found water, but it was too bitter to drink. I'm just going to call it Edgewood water, all right? So just not the best water. And everybody's like, I don't know how many times, like I remember Denny's when it was open, people would stop by and you could tell a traveler when they would say, there's something wrong with this water. It's just Edgewood water. So the people didn't want to drink it. And so what we find is verse 24 of chapter 15 of Exodus. It says, then the people complained and turned against Moses. What are we going to drink? They demanded. So God said for Moses to take this big log, piece of wood, throw it into the water, and all of a sudden the water became sweet. But here's one of the things that I have discovered, and I think we need to understand about ourselves. They got to a place of discomfort, and when comfort is gone, complaining begins. And so I think that's probably true of them. It's definitely true of us. I mentioned about the little church that I served in Abilene, Texas, and I watched this happen on 2 different occasions. In fact, when I was a youth minister, we were going through a period of growth. For this little church, they were starting to run about 120 people. It was a big thing. We were having like 25 kids in kids' church. I used to teach kids' church in a full suit. That was fun. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend that. And people are thinking, I'd like to see that. That's not going to happen. But, our student ministry, we had about 25 kids as well. And things were rocking and rolling. But I'm just going to say this, because it was so full and because we were starting to have growing pains and because voices that usually had control were losing their control, they began to complain. And eventually their complaining outweighed everything else, and it split the church. And I'm just going to say here that, listen, we're growing as a church, and Lord willing, we're going to continue to grow as a church, and we're going to go through some discomfort. There's going to be some changes, and there's going to be some things that's like, this doesn't feel like old Valley View. Listen, that's a good thing. And so if it's uncomfortable, the reaction, the proper reaction is to not complain. But we see that this complaining was kind of a pattern in the lives of God's people. We're going to go into chapter 16. In chapter 16, it begins with this. It says, then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin, that is Sinai, between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the 2nd month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you have brought us into the wilderness to starve to death. Now I'm going to land here for just a few moments and speak about complaining and what complaining does. So one of the things that complaining does is it distorts reality. When you think about this, that complaining distorts reality. What do we do when we get a little bit uncomfortable? We look at our current situation and we whitewash the past. Have you ever done that? I mean, you look back to the past and say, it was so good then. And so they're looking back to their past and they're saying, we used to sit around And we had all the food that we wanted, and we had like all this great stuff and pots full of meat, and it was just wonderful and great and awesome, and we just wish we were there when you were slaves. I mean, they whitewashed the whole entire thing and forgot about the fact that they were forced into hard labor. And I see this all the time. I see this in situations where couples, marriage, they reach a speed bump and they begin to be nostalgic about, well, it was better with when I was with this person, or it was better when we were at this stage of marriage. And we also distort reality because we make the other person out to be somebody that they're completely not. You ever done that? In fact, I think about that happens not just in marriage relationships, but it happens in all kinds of relationships. And then we do get historical. Like, how many of you have said, I just wish you could go back to the 1950s? Does anybody really want to go back to the time when cancer was a death sentence? Do we want to go back to a time where there was segregation and a racial divide that marked our country? I even think about, let's go back to the 1980s. I am a child of the 1980s. I will tell you that the music from the 80s is the best. Cinema from the 80s is the best. But do you know that the divorce rate peaked in 1980? And not just that, there was a lot of stuff going on. In fact, the Cold War, different things like that. I don't know that I would want to go back there. Anybody ever watched an old Western? Or Little House on the Prairie? That's my wife. Okay? And go, I would have loved to live back in the 1800s. It must have been so simple then. And I have to think about that. My wife, I have to say this, we give birth to toddlers, and she's not a big person. And so our first son was 2 weeks early, and he was 9 pounds, 14.6 ounces. He got stuck. He had a cone head. It was kind of funny. We've got pictures. But the reality, my wife and son would have died. So we, like complaining, we forget about all of that stuff. Also, complaining magnifies the problem. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, what did they say when they were out there without food? God has sent us out here to die. I mean, they've gone through the Red Sea. They were protected during the Passover. God provided for them during the plagues. It just provided water a few days before. And now all of a sudden, God has sent them out to die. Ever been at work and you have a coworker that's driving you nuts? And they continue to drive you nuts? And they continue to drive you nuts? Do they ever live rent-free in your head? And they just become like super large in your mind and in your heart? What about health problems, financial problems, marriage problems, family problems? These are all real problems, but when we focus on them and not on Jesus, these things become really, really big. Also, complaining robs faith. I want you to think about that here for a moment. I would even go as far as to say that when we are complaining, it becomes impossible for us to trust God in that moment. One of the realities that we find in the book of Exodus is that God is taking a people. In fact, I'm going to tell you that next Sunday, we're going to shift gears in the book of Exodus. We've been talking about how God acts. We're going to move into actually a different series because it's kind of a pivot. We're going to call this series Becoming a People. And the reality, what we're doing here is God is taking the people that was a family 430 years before. Now they're a nation, but they were a nation without guardrails. They were a nation without restraints. And so what God does in the book of Exodus, we're not going to go into Leviticus, but he basically says, now that you're a people, this is what it looks like to be the people of God. But even through some of their stresses and stuff that they're going through here, God is giving them guardrails. In fact, as we read on, and they're hungry, notice what God does in verses 4 through 8. This is actually pretty cool. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Look, I am going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day, people can go out and pick up as much food as they need for that day. I will test them in this to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day, they will gather food, and they prepare it. There will be twice as much as usual." So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, "By evening, you will realize it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning, you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaints, which are against him." They were complaining against Moses, but they're actually against God, not against us. What have we done that you should complain about us?" Then Moses added, "The Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satisfy you in the morning, for he has heard all your complaints against him. And what have we done? Yes, your complaints are against the Lord, not against us." And so what we find, and this is actually kind of miraculous, not just kind of miraculous, it is miraculous. Moses instructs the people to gather so that they could witness to the people about their complaints. Aaron speaks of the glory of God and basically says, listen, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have all the food you need. There will be meat in the evening. There will be manna in the morning. Do you know what manna literally means? What is it? They woke up and they saw this stuff, and like, what is it? And it's kind of like the sweet kind of cake bread sort of stuff that was very fulfilling. And quail covered the camp. I cannot imagine. So we're talking 2 million people. Do you know how many quail it takes to feed 2 million people? Have you ever had quail? I'm like, one is not enough. Sometimes 2 is not enough, but God provided all of that. And then we get to verse 15, and it says, the Israelites were puzzled when they saw it. What is it? They asked each other. They had no idea what it is. And Moses told them, it is the food the Lord has given you to eat. So God instructed the Israelites to gather manna each morning, quail in the evening, but only that which would suffice for one day. And if they took too much, what happened was maggots came in and the food became inedible. And this is what we find in verses 22 and 23. It says, on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much as usual, 4 quarts for each person instead of 2. Then all the leaders of the community came and asked Moses for an explanation. He told them, this is what the Lord's commanded. Tomorrow you will be a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath set apart for the Lord. So bake or boil as much as you want today and set it aside what is left for tomorrow. And so God is taking a little bit of discomfort in their life, and he is beginning to place guardrails into their existence and what it means to be the people of God. One of the things that God is doing is God is teaching them to trust him for their daily needs. And this is something that we find throughout the entire Bible. In fact, it's a consistent thread. Lamentations chapter 3, verses 22 through 23, it says, the faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin afresh every morning. So we should ask God for strength, but sometimes we just ask God for the strength for today. Like, God, I have a coworker that's driving me nuts. Give me the strength not to throat punch them today. And I will pray for that same thing tomorrow as well. And when Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount and he instituted or gave us the Lord's Prayer, which is a model prayer for us, he said, give us today the food we need. And so God provides, but one of the things that we have to understand is We need to trust God daily for that which we need in life. But also, God is introducing the Sabbath and the gift of rest. And there's a lot here. We'll get into the Sabbath next week as we get into the Ten Commandments. But then a week or so after that, we're going to talk more about God's blessing of time and how we use our time to honor Him. But after all of this, after God provides water and He provides food, we also discover that complaining is a chronic condition. We get into chapter 17, and we see this again. It says, at the Lord's command, the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of Sin and moved from place to place, eventually camped in Rephidim, but there was no water there for people to drink. So once more, the people complained against Moses. Give us water to drink, they demanded. Quiet, Moses said, or replied. Why are you complaining against me? And why are you testing the Lord? And again, testing God is a lack of faith. And in verse 3, this is what it says, but tormented by thirst. Again, probably distorting reality. But tormented by thirst, they continue to argue with Moses. Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us, our children, and our livestock with thirst? Again, magnifying the problem as we see here. But then in verses 5 and 6, it says, the Lord said to Moses, walk out in front of the people, take your staff, the one you used when you struck the water of the Nile, and call some of the elders of Israel to join you. I will stand before you on the rock at Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come gushing out. Then the people will be able to drink. So Moses struck the rock as he was told, and water gushed out as the elders looked on. Again, God provides. God provides in a miraculous way. And I'm thinking, and in 40 years, how many times did Moses have to strike a rock? How many times did this subsequent event happen over and over and over again? So they reach a place in the water, and so he strikes the rock, or he listens to God, and God brings forth. But notice what Moses does here in verse 7. This is important for us. Moses named the place Massah, which means test, and Meribah, which means arguing, because the people of Israel argued with Moses and tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord here with us or not? Big thing here. Moses marks the place so that they can remember their lack of faith. He names the place in such a way that they can remember their lack of faith and their complaining and their testing. And I think about this. Let me ask you, what is the place in your life? What is the area of your life that is marked by a lack of faith and complaining and arguing with God? What is an area of your life where it just seems like anytime that comes up, you begin to complain? You begin to see that your circumstances are much bigger than what you can grasp or imagine. Is it your marriage? Is it your spouse? That you, for some reason, have just developed this, that they are the problem? Is it your kids? Is it your job? Is it your circumstances? So it's interesting that God gives them a place, and the place is marked with this. And if you go to Psalm 95, one of my favorite Psalms, God says today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as you did on the day of Massah and Meribah. So it was marked. It was marked with their sin of complaining and lack of faith in God. But as we move on, there's something else that's really kind of interesting and cool here. In fact, I'm pretty amazed by this. In chapter 17, as it kind of brings to a close, the Amalekites come and they attack the Israelites. And Moses, with the help of Aaron and Hur, as they were fighting, kept his arms raised. And as long as his arms were raised, the Israelites were victorious. But if he put his arms down, they began to be defeated. Now, I'm thinking, I'm the type of guy that would go, huh, yeah, But after the victory, God says, here's what I need you to do. Verse 15. Moses built an altar there and named it Yahweh Nissi, which means the Lord is my banner. A few verses earlier, there was a place that was marked, right? Testing and grumbling and complaining and a lack of faith in God. But Yahweh Nissi, it means God is my banner. God is my provider. God is my protector. God is my victory. And I love this. And I think it's so cool how this kind of plays out. Because one place is named grumbling and complaining. One place is named testing God. And then another place is named God is my victory. God is my protector. God is my provider. And after all is said and done, when you think about the two different places with the two different names, it's almost like God brings them to a crossroads and says, so what banner are you going to live under? What banner are you going to live under? You can live under the banner of griping and complaining and testing God and a lack of faith in God, or you can choose to live under the banner of Yahweh Nissi. God provides. God protects. God is my victory. And so as a people, becoming a people, they get to choose. They get to choose what kind of people they want to be. Same is true for us today. We get to choose what kind of people we are. We get to choose what banner we live under. We can choose a path of complaining. We can choose a path of testing and quarreling with God. And listen, kind of made light of it today, but there's a lot to complain about. But just because there's a lot to complain about doesn't mean that that's the direct path that we ought to take. Or can we can live under the banner that God is my provider, and He is the one that gives me provision and protection and victory. And so when we zoom out, there's really this amazing picture, cool picture that I want to give you here today. Because when we think about this picture, it's one that God is intentional in giving. And this picture is our bottom line here today. The God who saves also provides and protects. The God who saves, the one who took them out of Egypt, the one who protected them in Egypt, the one who saved them from the death angel, also provides for them in the wilderness, provides for them through all the difficulties and challenging circumstances. And so the same God who saved them from devastation, the same God who spared the firstborn, the same God who protected them from Pharaoh, is the same God who is now providing for them and protecting them. And the truth is the God who saved them saves you. I want you to think about that. The same God that did all that he did in Egypt and all that he did in the wilderness, protecting and providing for his people, is the same God that we look to for our salvation. But our salvation comes through Jesus. And what God did is not only provide salvation, but protection and provision. And so, again, you might be at a place right now where you get to choose what banner you live under. Do I get to live under the banner of guilt and sin and shame and a Christless eternity in hell? Or do I choose to live under the banner of Christian, where Jesus has offered me victory? And so here's a challenge for you today. Choose your banner. Choose what you're going to live under. You can choose to live under the banner of, I want to do this on my own. Or you can choose the banner where Jesus offers you the free gift of grace that says, you deserve death. You deserve hell. But I have given my life for you. And I offer you a free gift of grace. There's nothing you have to do other than just take the gift. And if you've already taken the gift, Jesus said it this way: take up your cross daily and follow me. So listen, choosing a banner is not a one-time thing. It is a daily commitment to Jesus. But I want to go back to a verse that Jim mentioned last week, and I'm so glad he did. Verse 14 of chapter 14. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. I'm just going to say this: be still. Anybody watch the news and have your heart rate and blood pressure go up? Do you get worked up with all the stuff that's going on in our world? Sometimes what God is calling us to do is not to enter into the fray, but just be still. Be silent. And I want to challenge you. This is kind of hard to do. It's become part of my regular routine. Is spend time daily. And some of you are going to go, no way. Spend time daily just sitting and being still. Take some time just to allow God to speak to you. I heard a guy say many months ago that he goes out for 3 minutes every day, every morning when he gets up, and he just kind of takes in God's beautiful creation. And I've started doing that. I go out almost every morning, just stand on my porch. Sometimes there's still stars. Sometimes you can see a little bit of pink in the east. But it's just amazing just to be in the presence of God. Just be still. And finally this. Thinking about all the people throughout our East Mountain community who are choosing the wrong banner. Not the banner of God's victory. Not the banner of God's provision and protection. Pray daily for someone specific that you know who is living under the wrong banner. Will you join me in prayer?